should probably get a drink. I'm definitely gonna need a drink for this. A Ryan Coke should suffice. Yeah, there we go. How's it going? Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe during these unsafe times. I figured I would do something different for the channel this evening. I don't think I've ever seen another ASMR artist do this. And if this is something that's up your alley, maybe you like this sort of thing, or you're interested in just people's lives, this might be up your alley. But if you're here just to listen to nice whispered storytelling, then that'll work too. Yeah, we're going to discuss my life. I know I've gotten a few questions over the last year about my job and what I do and where I live, things like that. I figure the best way to do that is to just do an ASMR telling of my life. I'm not going to get into all the biggest, greatest details, but I'll give you guys the gist of it. And if you're interested in stories like that or people's lives, I think you'll be interested because my life isn't boring, I promise you. There's been ups and downs and triumphs and tragedies as well, including my birth. So yeah, guys, if this is what you're looking for, enjoy. I think you guys are going to enjoy this. I don't know how long this is going to be. It's probably going to be quite a bit long. I'll try to keep it under an hour, maybe if I can, but if it goes over, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll make some timestamps if you guys are interested in listening to the whole thing. I don't know if you will, but with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so obviously before we get started, guys, if you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. I'm curious to see how many people are actually going to want to watch this video. If there are other people out there searching for ASMR biographies or life stories, you know, it'll help make it easier for them to find the algorithm. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you don't miss out when I upload new content on this channel. Alright, so where's the best place to start? The story. I guess before we start the story, we should probably give some context on my family before we get into my birth. And in order to do that, we need to talk about residential schooling in Canada. For those of you that are not from Canada or are from Canada and are uninformed or just you're not in the know of what's happened, residential schooling in Canada was something that happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s to Native Americans. The Canadian government, along with the Catholic Church, decided to forcefully put Native American kids in these residential schools to civilize the Indian and fix the Indian problem, as they called it at the time. Now, what happened as a result of this is one of the biggest tragedies of the 20th century, in my opinion, and in many opinions. It's still being felt today. Many of those children were taken at gunpoint from the RCMP from their parents as young as 3 years old, and they would go until they were 18. What would happen at these these residential schools is could be considered war crimes or crimes against humanity. There was human experiments happened with some of these kids. They were neglected, they were beat, they were molested. When they were killed, they were thrown in mass graves unmarked. If you've been watching the news lately in the last year, these unmarked mass graves that the Catholic Church has been denying for years have been being dug up in all these old residential schools across Canada. So it really is an eye-opener for most Canadians, but it's not for us Native Americans. The reason I bring this up is the people that survived these residential schools, I'd say 90% of them came out with PTSD, and how they dealt with that was through substances, alcohol, drugs. And what happened was to cope with, the trauma of what those nuns and priests did to them, they became alcoholics. And alcoholism among Native Americans is different than it is against Caucasians, Europeans. Native Americans have been introduced to alcohol only in the last few hundred years, whereas in Europe they've been drinking it for, centuries. They've become a little more tolerant to it, whereas in Native Americans it's still fresh, fairly new, so we don't do well with it. We don't have a tolerance like our European brothers and sisters. So, with that being said, these people would drink and then they would abuse their kids, physically, sexually, whatever it may be. In my family's case, my grandmother was the second generation of these residential schools. Her parents went to these schools. Her father was very abusive to her and her siblings, with drinking and abuse of, physical and sexual nature. So they would get this abuse at home, my grandmother and her siblings, and they would also get it from the residential schools, which they had to attend as well. So they ended up with substance problems, which they then inadvertently passed down to their children, and which were my parents' generation. And all of my grandmother's children have substance problems. They did say, and I've heard it said before, that it takes about 3 generations to break this cycle. And if that's the case, it's true, as the cycle is broken with my generation, myself and my cousins. All of us are on a straight and narrow, but our parents were all substance abusers, and it stems back to those fucking schools. So if you're one of those people in Canada, or you're not from Canada and you're curious, maybe you come here and you see the Native American populace, homeless on the streets, and they make up the majority of the homeless and the drunks, and you're wondering why. That's why. That's 100% the reason why. So the reason I bring this up is it's the reason why I was born. So my biological mother gave birth to me when she was 15 years old. She got pregnant when she was 14. A 23-year-old man got her pregnant while they were living in this hovel, my grandmother's hometown hovel in Saskatchewan. A lot of substance abuse goes on there, as those are all children of residential schooling. And it was actually a 3rd or 4th cousin. It was my grandmother's cousin's child's kid that got her pregnant. So she didn't want to press charges, my grandmother, because their grandmothers were related, and she didn't want to start this big gossip war in this hovel, which we'll discuss later, because I ended up actually living there. So they moved. She moved with her kids. My mother was 14. Her second oldest was 17. And then they were all 2 years apart, the other 2 sisters. So yeah, February 22nd, 1986, in Holy Family Hospital in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where they moved, I was born. Prince Albert, Saskatchewan's this little dumpy town in northern Saskatchewan. Maybe in Mambus Center, Saskatchewan. Its nickname among Saskatchewaners is P8, because it's so dirty. It really is a dirty little city. PA is what it's short for. That's why people came up with the name PA. But that's where I was born. A little hospital called Holy Family Hospital, which actually was torn down a few years back. I didn't live there too long. We all moved to Edmonton when I was 3 months old. My mother was still living at home. What happened when we went to Edmonton was my mother actually went back to that hovel where all her friends were, all her 15, 16, 17-year-old friends, and she moved in with her uncle, and there she started to get into the drugs and the alcohol, and I was living with my grandmother. My grandmother and her boyfriend, Bob. I actually was pretty much adopted by them at that point. They took me in and they were treating me as their own. At some point my biological mother wasn't fit to raise me, as my grandmother has stolen me and my aunts. She was too addicted to drugs and alcohol, and it wouldn't have worked out. She was a teenage mother as well. So what she actually did was she came back to Edmonton and she took me away from my grandmother. Child Family Services did, because she said my grandmother was kidnapping me or something because I was staying with her. And so we moved into a foster home, my biological mother and me, and then she ran away from that foster home and she dropped me off at her sister's place. This aunt, her name is Aunt Julie, we'll talk about her later, and there I was living with her and her husband, who was an abusive piece of shit drunk. And one of my earliest memories, and I always think I have these memories because they're traumatizing memories, was being struck by them and also being locked in a bedroom. I always remembered that I was so young that I didn't know how to operate the doorknob. I couldn't twist it or whatever. I didn't know how to twist it. So they would lock me in their bedroom. And yeah, it was just cruel. They had a 1-year-old daughter at the time too. It was my cousin. And eventually she called her mother, my grandmother, to come and get me. And I went back and I lived with my grandmother, and I never left her again. I stayed with her until she passed. So yeah, I lived in Edmonton for 12 years. I went to a little Catholic school because my mother's Catholic, obviously residential schooling, that whole thing. It was very weird for me for that Catholic school, because in my class I was the only native-born Canadian for a long time. Eventually, an African-American kid, Jonathan, joined our class, but there was no other Canadians. They were all Polish, Ukrainian kids. There was Italians. Yeah, it was mostly Polish, though. I always remember that. That's where my love of Polish girls came from, because they were so gorgeous when I was a kid. Even I thought I loved them since I was a little kid. We seen them a few years back when we traveled to Poland, and yeah, they really are. They're gorgeous. So if you're from Poland, good for you. I'd never seen an unattractive Polish girl. But yeah, I went to that school, and yeah, it was pretty good. I didn't mind it. It was odd. Definitely odd for a while. Also, we were poor. I figured out pretty early on when I was a kid that we were poor, and that I was getting raised by my grandmother, and everyone else in my school had very young parents, and I had my grandmother and her boyfriend, who I call my dad, and they were both in their late 40s, early 50s. So it was a bit different there, and as well, my dad worked a job as a pipe fitter. They'd make a lot of money. They did the best they could for me, and yeah, some of my best memories don't involve money. You know, I don't believe money can dictate whether or not you're a good parent or not, because we had none, and I have memories from when I was a kid with my grandmother and my grandfather, I guess technically, that, you know, I think about to this day. You know, they're very dear to me. Like I said, we are poor, so one of my mother's things, my mother's, who I call my grandmother, by the way, you guys, one of my mother's nice things she used to do is we used to go window shopping, which is what she called it. We just go down to the mall and look at things. We could never buy them, and I loved it. I would hold her hand and know eventually we would end up at Westmount. At the mall we would go to Gretzky's. There was a Gretzky's shop that had a little coffee shop inside of it as well. It was a department store. Or Sellers as well, and they had a coffee shop. I know eventually we would end up there and we would share a cinnamon bun. She would buy me a toy sometimes, which was awesome. You know, other times, you know, maybe we'd go down to the Inglewood Cafe, which is a little cafe just up the street from where we lived, and, you know, we'd share a soup or something. You know, years later, when I was a man and I was serving people or a teenager, I'd see little grannies taking their grandkids. And I know a lot of servers would be like, they're not going to tip, they're just going to get soup or whatever else, and I would always make sure to serve them, because I would always think, you know, that was me. That was me and my grandmother, you know, when I was a kid, and, you know, it'd be shitty if someone frowned upon her doing that nice gesture for her grandkid or her son, as she considered me. So, yeah, we were poor, but the memories were great. This woman would rent me a video game every Friday, and for a long time, we had a spelling bee every Friday, and she would help me, she would study with me, and she would always tell me if I got 100%, which I always did, we would get a video game. And I always remember one time I didn't get 100%, I got 9 out of 10 right. And I was so devastated, I was crying in class. It's at the end of the day on a Friday, this test. And she came in class and she's like, why are you crying? And the teacher's like, Miss Josephine, do you tell him that if he gets 100%, he can get a video game? And she was laughing. She's like, he got 9 out of 10, and she's like, oh Jesus, you can get a video game still. Relax. Like, she started laughing, and I was just so devastated. Like, my world was over, my weekend was ruined, kind of deal. You know, nice little gestures. We were poor, so she would save up change and whatnot, little leftover change when bills and everything were paid, and she would do nice little gestures. Like, I always remember Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, and she, like Dennis the Menace as well, there's a few other movies. She would come and take me out of class on a Friday afternoon, and she would take me to the mall, and she would buy me a toy and everything else, and then she would take me to the movies to watch those movies, Dennis the Menace, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it's like she planned this whole day for me, this whole great day, and I will never, ever, ever be more grateful than that. Like, she was such a perfect woman. And, you know, if I could be half the parent she was to my children, I think I would be doing a pretty good job. She was amazing. So, now we're up to like 1997. I don't know if there's any other stories really I can touch on in Edmonton. My crazy Aunt Julie and my grandmother would go off and on without talking. She would do something cruel, my grandmother would call her out on it, and she couldn't do it. She couldn't take it, so they would stop talking for a while. So I would go without seeing my cousin Chantal for here and there. But my Auntie Arlene, very important to my story, she was also a substance abuser, and she was my grandmother's oldest daughter. She always lived around us, and she had her 3 sons, including Joey, her oldest, who's 1.5 years younger than me, who is my brother to this day. We were raised in the same house at certain points in my life. He came to live with us, but we always lived in the same apartment. As I said, I found out early on, or I figured out early on, that we were, you know, our family was poor, my Auntie Arlene included. We always lived in apartments. You know, sometimes for supper we would have, like, hamburger with ketchup or cut up wieners and ketchup, and, yeah, we were poor. But my Auntie Arlene was always there, and her kids were always around us. I was back and forth in their apartment, and we were very close that way. You know, at the end of the month, she always got her welfare for her 3 kids, and we would always do a big family shopping spree. You know, my grandmother and my grandfather and my mom and my dad we would join them. We would go to like Londonderry Walmart or something, and we just do a bunch of shopping, and I know I end up with a toy or something, so I was so excited about that. We get McDonald's if we went to like Walmart, which was a huge deal, you know. Yeah, so growing up was great. Even though we were poor, I loved it. I wouldn't change anything about it, even to this day. I think it makes me appreciate money a little more because of that. But yeah, my Auntie Arlene was always around. My cousin Joey was always there. My best friend, my first friend was my cousin Chantel, who's like 10 months younger than me. And where I was getting with this is I rarely got to see her because my crazy Aunt Julie and her would always get, my grandmother would always get into these fights. So in 1995, I think, my uncle Ambrose, my grandmother's brother, got diagnosed with stomach cancer, and it was too late. They were just going to make him uncomfortable, basically. He couldn't do chemo or anything. So in 97, he's from a reservation near that hovel where their family's from. So in 97, my mother and my father decided, after my father got laid off, that we would move to this hovel to be closer to my grandmother's brother. And I will say the last year I was in Edmonton, our poverty was at an all-time low, or high, whatever it is. We were really, really poor. I remember for Christmas, all I got was dollar store toys, which I would get a few here and there every Christmas, but it was all dollar store toys. So we moved to Saskatchewan. We moved to a little hovel. It's called Coal Bay. I think it always has a population of around 200 people, give or take. And way big culture shock for me. Coming from a city to that, I wasn't unfamiliar with this, because every summer, when my dad had holidays, we would take 2 weeks holiday. He would take a 2-week holiday. We'd go camping, usually around the mountains in Alberta, because we're obviously Edmonton. And also we would go and visit my mother's family in that reservation and in that hovel of Coal Bay. So I grew up there, visiting there at least twice a year. Usually around Christmas. We'd go every other Christmas. And we'd go there once a summer, twice a summer, or twice a year sometimes. So I knew, like, my relatives there. And yeah, I wasn't going in there as a complete stranger. Now, before I get on to everything else, let's discuss what a hovel is. A hovel's like less than a village. Like I said, a population, I think it is under 200. I can't remember, 500. I think it's 500. I don't know. Regardless, it's small. And what happens with places like this, it's not just there, it's small towns as well. This hovel had like 5 big families that lived there, including the family I was related to. And there is this, how do I say this form of like elitism among these families, you know. As soon as I got there, even as an 11-year-old, I knew, like, the politics. Certain kids weren't allowed to hang out with certain kids, and you know, even though I was friends with people at school, I knew that their parents didn't like me to hang out with their kids, and they only wanted their kids to hang out with certain kids. It was such bullshit. I'm really happy I don't live there, let me just say that, because I don't think it's ever changed. But yeah, we moved there in 97, and my uncle, actually my grandma's brother, passed away that same year. So living there as an 11-year-old, it was paradise. Because we lived outside, you know. I had my cousin Alvin, who I knew my whole life. He was my mother's other brother's kid. We were the same age. And we played together, you know, twice a year. He was one of my favorite cousins. And we just played in the bush all day long. It was summertime and wintertime. I learned so many things: trapping, snaring. I first started playing baseball there. I played fastball. That was their big thing. They played there. Yeah, it was paradise as a kid. And then I started coming of age. I had a lot of girlfriends there that were my friends. They were older, though. I always say, if these girls that I had relationships with or was friends there were my age, I don't know how my life would have turned out, but they were all older, 2 or 3 years older, and I was too young to see, like, signs with certain ones that were, they were interested, but I was just too young. I was like 12, 13, they were 15, 16, and obviously they felt like the way I felt when I moved away. The only women that were around were like, they were like 3 years, 2 years younger, and I'm like, I'm not gonna fucking date a 12 or 13-year-old when I'm 15. Others did when I left, which was fucking disgusting, but you know, in little towns like that, that shit happens, right? So, yeah, when I started to come of age, it started to get a little lame, because I'm like, I'd rather be living in Edmonton where I can, you know, find someone I can date that's my same age, and, you know, not so young, because all the older ones, they all had boyfriends and everything by then, and we had that weird, awkward, we all hit puberty, and, we stopped being friends. We were all really friendly up till then. They were my best friends, those 3, 4 girls, and when we all hit puberty, they all got boyfriends and everything. We just stopped being friends. But yeah, and then at school there, only went up to grade 7, I think it was, no, grade 8. And then we had to take a bus to a town nearby, an actual town, to go to high school. And that's really where I got my taste of, I want this life. Like, all those people I met there, they all fell in love with me. I fell in love with them. They were so fun. There was girls I wasn't related to, or that weren't too young or too old for me there, that loved me as well. We'd go on class trips and, you know, youth conferences in the summer, and I loved them. I spent more time with them than I spent with the people at the hovel towards the end, because they were like my best friends. And that town had become so boring. Like, all we would do was walk up and down that road. It was like a big 9. We used to call it walking the 9. And that's it. Then we'd sit at the town hall, and we would just talk and laugh and tell jokes. And, you know, I just couldn't help but think, I'm like, man, I'm wasting my teenage years. Yeah. So, the biggest, first important time of my life actually happened the year we moved to this hovel. The year we moved to this hovel, my grandmother and my mother found out that she had something wrong with her liver, a new form of liver disease, and they couldn't figure it out. It was brand new, so there was no treatments. She was doing experimental treatments. Her liver, obviously, from, you know, substance abuse over the years. Even when I was younger, living with her, she would throw parties once in a while with her friends and her relatives, and she would drink really heavily, but it took its toll on her. And in '97, they told her, this is probably going to kill her in 10 years, is what they told her. It was '96 or '97, I can't remember exactly. So I was informed of this, and it devastated me, because I couldn't imagine living without her. And so, but, you know, she went on a strict diet. She stopped, you know, drinking and everything else. And, it looked like everything was fine. Like, I just kind of forgot about it, but it was there. So, the reason I bring this up is, it's something that's really going to affect me later on here in this story. Ryan Cokes with the fresh ice are so good. I guess technically rum and coke. I like my Captain Morgan Spice rum. So yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this so far. I think we're going to get up to me about being 14 to 15-ish. I would say it was around 2000, 2001. I just really was fed up with this living in that hovel. And I know I had this guilt, because I know my grandmother wasn't going to be around forever, and I didn't want to leave her. But at the same time, I'm like, man, I'm only gonna be a teenager once. I want to enjoy this. I'm so bored. I would say that I contemplated suicide living in that town towards the end, because I was so fucking sad and depressed. I don't think I seriously considered it, but I was that depressed and sad living there. You know, thank God my cousin Joey was around to keep me sane. He was always there for me and always there with me. But eventually I told my mother in the summer, I think it was of 2002, that I was going to move in with my Uncle Mike, which is a big problem. When you want to talk about substance abuse, this guy to this day is a massive drug addict, alcoholic. So, she was infuriated, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't live in this town anymore. So I moved out of that hovel into the town over Meadow Lake in 2002. And I moved in with him, and sure enough, by the second weekend I was there, he was throwing parties, making me babysit his kid while he got hammered. And eventually my grandmother actually moved into his house with us. He was renting a tiny little World War II house, a really, really poor house. And my grandmother moved in, and eventually my dad moved in as well, because the house we had in Cold Bay at the time, the hovel, was really a little cabin, a tiny little makeshift cabin. It was a fire. We didn't have plumbing. We had an outhouse. We had no running water. We had a wood stove. Like, we were poor. When I say we were poor, I mean we were poor. Like, we had a makeshift house, like a big shack, basically, in Cold Bay towards the end. So they treated it kind of like a cabin. They moved into this house in Cold Bay, in Meadow Lake, sorry. Meadow Lake is only about maybe 45-50 minutes away from Cold Bay, so it's not that far, but yeah, she moved. I basically made them move. And she thought it was better anyway because she's closer to a clinic. Because I think around 2001, 2002, we started to realize, like, she was starting to decline. Not so much me, because they kept me in the dark a lot. Actually, you know, it might have been the fall 2001. We moved to Meadow Lake. It was around there, so I always get this confused, and I have an elephant memory. Yeah, we started to, you know, see her starting to decline. And I always say this when I talk about Meadow Lake. Again, fell in love with the people there. They fell in love with me. We talked about this in my Fragrances My Life video. I discovered fragrances then. I had so many flirtationships, little girlfriends, so many friends. I went from fast pitch in Cold Bay to playing AA hardball there. I first dabbled in wrestling there. That was a very important thing for me in my life, as you'll discover later on. And it happened by chance. I was watching a UFC one evening, and I was hoping to see a kung fu guy or a karate guy fight each other. And actually it was Randy Couture. He was fighting Pedro Hizo Muay Thai, and I think Muay Thai is the kickboxing. And Randy Couture's style was wrestling, and I'm like, wrestling? Like the guys that wear the spandex and they're all rubbing all over each other at the high school, what the hell is that gonna do? Like, how's that gonna help them? And I realized, my goodness, he kept taking him down, staying on top of him, beating him up. I'm like, that makes sense, because they have to put people on the ground. So I signed up for wrestling the very next day in 2002, and yeah, I started to do wrestling there. But life was, like I said, that was weird. I'd be out at parties, hanging out with girls, whatever it may be, and I always had that knot in my stomach because this is the end of 2002. My mother actually got informed that summer of 2002. We all went down to a meeting for her checkup in Saskatchewan, and the doctor told us she had declined enough. They actually talked to me and my father. He had a meeting with us, and he was very blunt, and I think people that have gone through this know this happens, right? Like, they want to inform you so you have no misgivings about what's happening. They pulled us into an office, and he told us straight out, as bluntly as possible, she's going to die within the next year. It's going to kill her. There's nothing we can do. We're just going to make her comfortable. And we were devastated. My dad was actually crying before that, and I couldn't. I was shocked. And so obviously for that whole year, we made it through Christmas. I remember we had a really nice Christmas for her. I'm having the time of my life as a teenager, but at the same time, I know I'm coming home to a sick mother. And she was in and out of the hospital in Meadow Lake. I didn't know until towards the end, she was getting her liver, not pumped out, but like it would fill with fluid, and they take the fluid out, and it was very painful for her. And I know that was happening. And they wanted me to concentrate on my schooling so badly. They kept me in the dark about how bad things were, and they played it down. And I remember I came home from school one day, and she wasn't home, and my dad wasn't home, and I was like, where are they? And I was like, are they back at the clinic? So I walked to the hospital, which isn't that far away, and I asked for my grandmother, and they says, yeah, she's in this room. So I went in that room, and she was laying there asleep, and I woke her up and sat with her for a bit. I remember she was trying to make it seem like it's fine, I'll be back tomorrow. She gave me $20 to go rent a video game, relax, and I remember I took the 20 and I went to the video store and I rented the video game and I couldn't go home. I just went back to the hospital, I sat with her. And I think it was around that time, I'm like, my goodness, I guess this is not going to get better. They kept telling me there was a chance she would get a liver transplant, which never was the case, but again, they wanted me to keep hope, so my academics wouldn't be, disrupted, and I would graduate, because none of my mother's kids graduated before. My Aunt Julie, the crazy one, got a GED when she was 20 or something, and she ended up making a good thing about her, so she ended up becoming a bank manager, but we'll talk about that later on. So it's very important to my mother that I finish high school, so they kept, kind of dangling this falsehood in front of me to try to make me kind of relax a bit. And, yeah, it worked, because I wasn't as worried, but I still had this knot in my stomach, something wasn't right. And, I look back at it now, and it's one of my biggest regrets, and I think I accounted to that, them keeping me in the dark. Honest to God, it's probably my top 5 regrets in my whole life. This is pretty deep, so I remember my mother picked me up from school, and it was the summer 2003 now, and I had plans to go to a party with my friend Cody that night, that this girl I was kind of seeing was going to be there, and I was really excited, and I wanted to go home and get ready, and, just go and relax. And I remember she picked me up, and she was feeling good that day, and she asked me, she said, hey, you want to go window shopping? Meadow Lake's got one main street. She said, you want to go window shopping with me? And just go browse around, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go window shopping, Mom. Like, I was 17 years old. She said, no, come on, let's just go. And I was like, I don't want to go, like, it's embarrassing. The last time I went window shopping with her a year prior, we were downtown, and she took me into the Salvation Army, which we used to go a lot when we go window shopping. That's where I got a lot of my clothes when I was a kid, but it was embarrassing. As, a 16-year-old, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be seen in here. And she was like, no, let's go. And I told her I didn't want to go. And she started getting more pushy, and I said, hey, I don't want to go, stop asking me. And I always remember she kind of got mad, and she yelled a bit, and she said, God damn it, Randy, I'm dying. Like, why don't you want to spend any time with me? And, and I remember thinking, oh, you're such an exaggerator, you're not dying. And, she died a month later, because a month or 2 later. This is in the summer, so this was July or August, so just to put that in perspective. I always tell people, like, I would give a year of my life if I could go and window shop with her for that 1 hour she wanted to go now, But again, I try not to be hard on myself, because I honestly thought she wasn't going to die. They made it seem like it was so, it was going to get better, and there was a chance she'd get a transplant. So, yeah, but it honestly is one of my top 5 regrets in my whole life, for sure. Something that sticks in my craw to this day. But yeah, I think it was the middle of September, beginning of September. This is weird, and I can always tell what time this was in my life. The New Jersey Devils just won the NHL Stanley Cup. And one of the players was a player called Scott Frasian, and he's from Meadow Lake. And he actually brought the Stanley Cup to Meadow Lake. And it's right across the street. We lived at the arena. And all these relatives and everything came to town, and we all got lined up to go see it. And I always remember my mother was laying in her bed. She couldn't get up. She was, it was like that, at least once or twice a week, it was hard for her to get out of bed. She would lay on the couch once in a while. And I remember when I was going to go see it, she was walking out of the bedroom, and she showed me her stomach, and it was swollen. The one side was swollen, and I remember I had this fear go down my spine, and she said I might have to go and get this drained again. And then her brother came and visited her in her bedroom while she was relaxing, and that's when I started to come a little bit more real for me. And then we drove with her, my dad and her went down for a checkup in Saskatoon, and she got a little room in general part of the hospital in the city. This is the city hospital, mind you. And I remember we left her. We went home, and that same night, I think it was, or no, the next day, my dad told me he had to leave. Something happened to her. He left in a hurry, and they said that she went into a pre-coma while she was down there. And me and my aunt and me were going to go down the next day to go see. And I remember I was so anxious. I wanted to go right then and there, but, you know, obviously I'm 17. I don't have a license or anything, or even a vehicle. So I had no choice. We were going to catch a ride with my aunt's cousin, Larry. He was going to Saskatoon, so he was going to give us a ride. So the next day, you know, they told us, you know, that morning that, oh, she's awake now. She's not in a coma or anything now. But we drove all the way there, which is not far from Middle Lake. I think Saskatoon's like an hour and a half. And I remember when we got there, I rushed out of the car and I ran into the hospital. I didn't wait for my aunt or my cousin Larry or our cousin Larry. And I took the elevator straight up to the floor where she was, and I went to that general room where she was at, you know, a few days earlier. She wasn't there. It was a older gentleman there, so I asked the nurse, you know, where's, you know, Josephine? And she told me, oh, she's in ICU, which is a floor up. And I said, okay, I didn't know what ICU was or anything. And so I went up there and I had to buzz in. I told them I'm here to see Josephine, I'm her son, and they said, okay, they buzzed me in, and that was the wrong thing to do. You know, they should have checked first, or someone should have been there, because I honestly think my cousin Chantel tells me to this day that I have PTSD over, you know, these moments or this particular moment. But I always remember I went and asked the lady when I got buzzed in which room, and she showed me, you know, behind a curtain, and I went behind the curtain, and I always remember she was wrapped up in a blanket, like she looked like a little taco, like a little burrito. They had her so wrapped up in with like a toque on her head too, and I almost didn't recognize her. I always remember she was breathing really fast, like she was trying to catch her breath. And I remember she looked over at me and she said hello in like a little girl's voice. You know, it was so weak and faint. And I remember everyone used to say, and I always give this advice to this day, don't show someone that's in a situation like that don't be scared and don't cry in front of them, because you'll scare them. And I remember I stood there and I was absolutely shocked. And I always think of that scene in Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt when he sees Anthony Hopkins for the first time after he had a stroke. He tries to put that smile on his face, but you could see he's devastated, and I did the same thing. I smiled there and I couldn't talk, because I knew if I talked I would burst into tears. And I pulled a chair up next to her and I sat and I put my head on her shoulder. And my chin and her eyes looked up at her and I smiled, and I couldn't help the tears. And I put my head down so she couldn't see my tears. But she was looking down at me, smiling when I was smiling at her. She couldn't talk. She was so weak. And then I remember my dad walked in and he started to cry behind me. I heard him. And I had to leave, you know, the room. Those of us that have been to Saskatoon City Hospital, I don't know if they're still there. They used to have cardboard cutouts, and behind the Saskatoon City Hospital is a big park, a nice big park, with paths and bike paths and everything. And I remember I went back there and I laid under a big pine tree, and there's these cutouts around me, one of which was like a cowboy laying under the tree beside me, like a cardboard cutout. I always remember I laid right there beside him, the tree next to him. And I, like, to this day, like, I had like one of the most devastating like cries of my life. Like, I was so shocked and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, this is actually happening. You know, she's gonna die, I think, and I don't know if it's gonna get any better. So, you know, about an hour or so I composed myself. I went back, and it turns out she was in that state when I seen her because they gave her morphine and she was high or whatever. So when I got back, she was actually able to speak, and I was speaking with her, and, you know, a whole bunch of other family was there, and the next day she was sitting up and combing her hair and talking with everybody, and she kept telling me, they're going to put me back in that general room, and then after that, they're going to send me home, and then I could just see the doctors in Meadow Lake. That was never what was going to happen, but she was telling me that. She told me, you have to go home then. You have to go back to school, because I think at this point I missed about 4 days of school. She's like, you have to go back to school. So a few days go by, and, it's one of those things. I think back on it now. The very last words we ever spoke to each other was the day before I was to go back to Meadow Lake. I told her I loved her, and she told me she loved me as well, and I left the room. And overnight, she had vomited while she was asleep, and it burned her esophagus. So she had to go under, I'm not sure, hair and morphine and everything. So I actually didn't go back to Meadow Lake the next day. And I always, another regret is I never seen her that day, because I didn't want to upset her thinking I was still there. And they're like, she's going to be fine. They're going to take her to Edmonton, and then she's going to get a transplant. So next time you see her, you'll come to Edmonton on a weekend, and she'll be getting ready to get her transplant. So the day we were leaving for Meadow Lake, she got airlifted to Edmonton. They informed us that she went into a coma in Edmonton, and that we better get to Edmonton. So now I'm like, it's an emotional roller coaster. I'm like, is she better? Looks like she's getting better. I'm going back to school, and so we get to Edmonton, and I go and see her. We get there in the evening, and my dad takes me in to see her, and now she's hooked up to ventilators, and she's in a coma. She's not conscious, and very minimal, activity in her brain, everything else they were saying. I believe there was, because I remember I went and stood over her bed, and I said, what I've always wanted to say, but I never did, and I didn't want to regret never saying it. So I told her I was very proud. She raised me, and I was so grateful, and she was an amazing mother, and everything good in me came from her, and everyone always tells me that, so you did a good job. And as I was telling her this, she was moving and making noises, but she was unconscious. So I always know she hurt me. However she did, I don't know. And then we went and stayed at my other grandmother's house, Bob's mother's. And the next morning we went back to the hospital. This is at the Edmonton University Hospital, by the way. They informed us that, it was rapidly, our organs were shutting down, and that we need to consider taking her off life support. Doctor had all of us, like 10 family members in a room, and he proposed this, and he told us this is a blessing, because sometimes this gets dragged out, and he told us a story about kids that didn't want to let their mother go, and months went by, and they could smell the rot. Her organs are rotting, and if she's conscious, the amount of pain she would have been in, and it's good that this is happening this way now. I could just let her go, and there's nothing. They're saying there was no brain activity at that point, everything else, and so we all agreed. I remember my aunt, her sister was in disbelief, and she was crying and shaking her head, and she said, no, there might be a chance. We're all like, there's no chance. All of the other siblings, and she looked at me, I always remember, and she asked me, like, what do you think? Yeah, she asked me, she said, what do you think? You think we should do it? And I always remember I was in a trance. I was just nodding, like, yeah, we need to. And I remember they all agreed, and I went to go sit beside her one last time, my mother. And I remember I couldn't help it, and I was crying so hard, and she was moving, even though there's no brain activity. They said she was moving and making noises, almost as if she heard me crying. She didn't want me to cry. And I remember I was putting her hand on my head like I used to when I was a little kid. And she had big hands. My grandmother had big hands. Our family are big people. I'm 6'3", 240. All of my cousins, my uncles, they're all over 6'3". I always remember looking at her hands. They had bruising on them, from her needles and everything else from the hospitals. And I always remember holding her hand and thinking about, when I used to play as a kid, a little boy, in her bedroom, when she'd be taking a nap. This is before kindergarten, or maybe it was during kindergarten because I had half days. I always remember she had a red sheet or a red blanket over the window as a curtain, and it would make the bed look red like Mars, I used to think, as a kid, and I'd play around her body with my toys, my Masters Universe toys, He-Man and all them, and her hands, I always remember her hands, I could still see them, and I would go and I'd play with her cheeks and everything, and she would playfully bite at my hands if she woke up when I was doing that, and, you know, I was trying to look at everything on her. And the whole family came in, you know, all the religious family were there doing prayers and everything. And then a doctor came in, and that's what they do. He just went straight to the machine. He started turning everything off. Everyone started crying really heavily. And I remember I got up and I whispered in her ear. I said, no whisper, really told her in her ear. I said, don't be afraid, you know, go wherever you're going, heaven. You know, go to heaven. You know, she's very religious. And I kissed her on the head and rubbed her head. And I always think about, you know, she was in her room when I was born. And when I took my first breaths, she was there, you know, probably rubbing my head as well when I was put in my mother's arms. And I always think that, you know, I rubbed her head as she took her last breath and kissed her, and she did the same for me when I took my first. And, yeah. We went straight to a funeral home after that, and that funeral was that same night. Because this happened early in the morning, like 6 in the morning, 6 or 7 in the morning. And it was all like pretty much a surreal shock. If anyone here has ever dealt with death, of that like closeness, you know what it's like. I always remember at the funeral home, which is on the south side of Edmonton. I remember going for a walk to the edge of, like, the valley. They have all those viewpoints looking over the valley of the Saskatchewan River. And I remember sitting there, and I seen people that were jogging on the trails. And one guy was biking with, listening to a Discman or something. And there was people, like, on their balconies having smokes in the apartment buildings nearby. I look up and there's birds flying in the sky. I'm like, when life just goes on, you know. It just goes on. And I had this sadness in me because I thought she was this beautiful, beautiful, magnificent person. Super religious too, like, and it's just gone. Like, if you guys watch my spooky stories video, actually it's not spooky at all when I look back at it, but that light I see in my room, I talk about it then. I won't touch too much on it here, but I always say that was her, and she was her letting me know, because that's what I was really sad about, is that, you know, she's gone, and it's just pitch blackness, and there's nothing left. You know, that's the end of life. It's just very depressing, and I think she alleviated that. But yeah, so that was the end of September of 2003, and what had happened afterwards was my family went into mourning, obviously. My dad worked back at that hovel. That hovel, that's an hour and a half away. He actually worked at a logging camp, and they had their own little cabins and everything there, so he actually would be away for a week, and he'd be home on the weekends. Sometimes he'd be gone for 2 weeks, he'd be home for a weekend. He'd give me like $500 for groceries and everything else, and he'd leave. So it was so weird. I went right back to school the next day after the funeral, and it was such a shock. I don't think I was able to mourn properly because I didn't cry for a long time. I actually would talk to my mother like she was still there in the house, and I think I look back on that now, that's so fucked up. Like, I needed to talk to somebody or have someone with to mourn to, and I didn't. My cousin Joy would come and visit my Aunt Arlene, who I'm really close to. She was mourning herself. That was her mother. So I didn't really get a chance. I never cried. I looked through old photo albums to try to make myself cry, and I just couldn't do it. I chalked it up to that I cried so much before that I didn't get a chance. And this is where we get to one of the more tragic parts of my life story that leads to a dark time. It was 2 months after she had died, around December. And in December, when my dad would come back for his weekends off, he would go to the bar. And one day he brought home a woman from the bar, like a haggard little goblin-looking woman. And I was so upset and so insulted that he brought this woman home. And he brought her into the bed where my mom and him shared their bedroom. I was so fucking hurt because my mother's stuff was gone by then. Her aunts and came over to the house the day after the funeral, and they took all her stuff out and they put it in storage, which really upset me because the first day after the funeral, I remember when I got home, the first thing I did was I went to the laundry hamper to smell her clothes, and I went and I smelled her perfumes. To this day, as a fragrance guy, I've never found that perfume. I don't know what it was. But it really upset me that he brought this woman home, and I remember I got into a big screaming match with him. He left the house because I kicked him out. I was very angry. He called me from a phone somewhere, and he told me I had to get out of the house or he was going to call the cops. He didn't want me living there anymore. So I packed a bag. My cousin Joey helped me. And I went to my Auntie Arlene's place. And, she was very hurt that he did that as well. And I remember I went straight to the bedroom down in the basement. And I laid in that bed. And I had, to this day, the saddest, cry session. I cried for hours of my life. Like, the most important person in the world to me had just broken my heart. Well, I lost my mother as well. He was all I had left, I figured, and he just abandoned me. And this is where my crazy Aunt Julie comes in. So, the months after my mother's death, my Aunt Julie was calling me every other day. I look back on it and I thought for a long time it was her being really friendly and making sure I was okay. We would just talk and watch Seinfeld together over the phone on TV together, and she was living in Churchill, Manitoba as a bank manager. And she kept bringing up, if something happens, you can come and live with me. And, her son Brian, who was like 14 or 13 at the time. And I was like, that's kind of nice, but I like living in Meadow Lake. I don't think anything's going to happen. And then obviously this thing happened with my father. I don't know if I touched on this on my Spooky Stories video, but she claims to be a reluctant clairvoyant, I guess you could say. She figures she sees dead people, dead relatives come and visit her, and that's why she drinks. Where this merit comes from for me is when I went to my Auntie Arlene's after my fight with my dad. That was about 9 o'clock at night, and I think it was like 2 in the morning. My cousin Jason came downstairs and he said, you gotta get on the phone, and Auntie Arlene, or Auntie Julie, wants to talk to you. And I was thinking to myself, how the fuck does she know I'm here? Like, I went up the stairs 2 in the morning and I talked to her. She says, what happened? I was like, what do you mean? She goes, well, your mother's in my bedroom crying, and I know it's about you, because she says when she gets visited by these spirits or whatever, they don't talk, she just feels what they want, I guess you could say. And she says, yeah, it's about you, I know that much. So what happened? She says, it sounds like you're hurt. And I told her what had happened, and then she told me, okay, I'm going to send money, and you're going to get in a Greyhound bus ticket tomorrow, and you're going to come to Thompson, Manitoba, where I'm staying for a few days, because I'm here for business, and we'll train up to Churchill. Well, my aunt, luckily and smartly, knew I shouldn't go alone, because this Julie's very cruel. So she sent her son Joey with me, and we got on a bus. My father, Bob, actually drove us to North Battleford to get on a bus, and it wasn't awkward. He didn't talk to us the whole way there. I always remember this. And when I got out of the truck and I got onto the bus, I remember he started to bawl. Like, he knows he fucked up, and that's it. That's the end of this chapter in his life. 17 years, it's gone. Now he's got nobody. And I always remember Shadow of the Sun was playing from my mixtape in the truck on the way there. And every time I hear Shadow of the Sun, I always think of that last drive and how devastated, how devastated he was. He knows he fucked up. He never apologized or anything. He knows he fucked up. And we came to Thompson, and we got in a train with her. And already while we were in Thompson, me and her went at it over. She bought a pack of Nutrient bars, and she was getting angry at us. We weren't eating them, so I ate. I think the purple ones was a variety pack. I ate the purple ones. She gave me shit for eating the purple ones, and already I'm like, well, you told me to eat them. I was only 17. I was turning 18 in February, and this happened in January. When I left Meadow Lake, I should say, like, I left all my friends. I had a girlfriend, you know. I honestly thought I would live the rest of my days, well, the rest of high school at least, there. And she gave me the choice, and I took it. I said goodbye to all my friends, my little girlfriend. I thought it'd be an adventure, because Churchill's bullet capital of the world. You know, it'd be something different. And so I did that, and yeah, we took the train from Thompson to Churchill, and obviously I was heartbroken. I was homesick, you know. I wondered if I'd ever see my friends again. My girlfriend and me exchanged emails, which I just made a brand new email for when I went to Churchill. I never used the internet before, I think, because we didn't have a computer. We were poor, but my aunt did, so I knew I'd have access. I got a bunch of friends and everything's emails, and got to Churchill. And as soon as I got there the next day, she's like, you gotta go out and you gotta get a job. Which I knew was coming, because she told me she wanted me to move with her for the simple fact she wanted me to get a job and save money for university or college. I would live with her and create a nest egg, is what she said. Get a job and save a bunch of money, so when I was graduated, I'd go into a college. And I was like, okay. So the next day when I got to Churchill, she's like, okay, she put me in the tiniest room on a child single bed, I always remember. And she'd bought a queen-size air mattress bed for my cousin Joey, so he got the bed I should have got, because I was twice the size of him. And she's like, you gotta get a job, so tomorrow I'm going to look for a job. So I went out and I actually got a job as a waiter at the Seaport Hotel. My only job experience before then was tree planting and fighting fire. I forgot to say I did that for summers when I lived in that hovel, for money for clothes and stuff. So I got a job as a waiter, Seaport Hotel. Mike Spence, the mayor of Churchill. I think he's still the mayor of Churchill now. I'm friends with his. But he owns that hotel. He's part owner anyway. So I went and I did my orientation, everything else. My week training with a friend of mine named Ashley. She was the waitress there. And I started to work there. And I remember I got my first full paycheck, which I think was only like $325 or something like that. And my aunt works at the bank where I had to cash it. Was like, okay, I'm gonna take this check, this first check, and this is gonna pay off your bus ticket and your train ticket to get here. And I was like, oh, okay. And she says, from here on out, I will be taking $200 of every paycheck, and it'll be go towards rent, because you have to learn to pay rent. It's something you have to learn, she told me. I'm like, $200, holy shit. And yeah, so she would garnish $200 for every check, so I'd get like $125 to myself to put in savings for my nest egg. I had to go to school there. I took a Marlborough school. The town of Churchill is a little tiny, isolated town. You can only get there by plane or train. And everything's in this massive complex, because it's Arctic weather. This massive complex has everything in it. It has the gyms there, the town halls there, the schools there, the high schools there, the hospitals there. There's restaurants in there, gyms, you name it. So I had to go to school there. And I always remember the first day was like an episode of The Bachelor, because I was the first new kid there since this Newfoundland kid that moved there like in grade 7 or 6 or something. So I always remember the first day we went to the library in the complex, and I always remember sitting there and there was an empty seat beside me, and the girls kept coming over and introducing themselves. And I always remember they kept hyping up this girl, their hot girl of the group, like their their princess, I guess you could say. They're saying, oh, she likes you, she thinks you're cute, blah blah blah. You know, she's very pretty, and I'm like, okay, like I don't know, like I'm not really looking to date anybody right now. I just left a girlfriend in Middle Lake, you know, a really nice kid, a girl, and yeah, it was funny. But you know, that girl didn't like that. She hated that. She became like my frenemy while I was there. You know, she was really friendly to me and then very mean to me when her little minions would be around. It was so stupid. Also, I'd made friends with one of the local tour company's daughters. She was my age. There was only 3 of us that were 18. I just turned 18. So we'd all go to the bars together, me, her, and another girl called Ashley. I think her mom owned something at the airport as well. Like, the thing about Churchill is most of the kids there are rich. Their parents, if they're a part of the tourism there, because Churchill's the polar bear capital of the world. Like, they get hundreds of tourists there during the polar bear months. And yeah, if your parents own gift shops, anything like that, hotels, you're very wealthy. They were also very different people in that I think it's because they were so isolated. They had their own sense of humor. What they found was funny, inappropriate, offensive. It was different than what you or me or someone else would, because for a lot of them, they've never left that little town. It's expensive. You might take the train to Thompson nearby, but to fly is, you know, it's almost $1,500 probably. It's $900 from here in Thompson, so yeah, it'd be close to $2,000, $1,500. So yeah, it was kind of odd like that. And I remember I had my email, and in the restaurant I worked in, they had a public computer, and again, to show you how new to computers and emails I would go and use it to email my friends back home in Meadow Lake. And I remember around this time I started fooling around with this one girl. We call her the poutine girl because she came into my restaurant. And I always remember I met the first, like, blue collar. I know so many of these guys now when I was that old, and I remember he would have been in his 30s, and this girl would have been 16 because I was 18. And I remember she came into the store, and she really had a nice bum, and she got a poutine. And I always remember that the cook named Scott came out, and he looked, you know, watching TV. I think playoff hockey was on, and the National Predators were playing, and Jordan Tutu's from Churchill, so everyone was, or from Rankin Inlet, so everyone was paying attention, including Scott. And I remember he came out of the kitchen, he looked over, and he seen that poutine girl go back to her table. And I remember I went to the back, and I got the poutine, and I remember he always whispered to me, he goes, yeah, that poutine girl's got a nice bum, eh? And I remember I just burst out laughing. Yeah, because she's like 16, he's like 30-something. It was just so funny. Like, I know so many people like that now. I won't get into too many Scott stories, but yeah, so I was fooling around with this poutine girl, and her friend, I can't remember her name now, Alyssa or something. Her friend had a big crush on me, and they actually tried to, like, have a threesome with me at one point, but I had wanted nothing to do with her friend. We were over at their place. I won't get into details, and I really, really did not want anything to do with her friend. And then her friend started getting mad at her because me and her were fooling around, like I cut her grass or something. She never had a chance. There was no way. I didn't find her attractive, and she was very annoying. Well, I made good friends with one of those tour company's daughters, because again, she was 18. She was a really, really cool person. She was beautiful too. Both those girls were 18 were. And you know, I would go back and I would talk to my friends, you know, from Meadow Lake on that email, while she used to go and use that computer because she didn't have internet. It was like a public computer. And I remember we used to have to give her shit because she'd be on there for hours, and it's for hotel guests. I remember not the next day, but like one of these days I went to school, and everyone's like, hey, this girl, Alyssa, forwarded an email where it's showing, like, you're telling people back home that you're dating, you know, this girl. I was like, what? She goes, yeah, and I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. And this little princess I told you that really wanted to date me, that was my friend and me, she actually printed it out and she showed me, and it was actually just like a three sentence email I'd sent out to my friend Dana. Actually, it was in Meadow Lake, and she just changed like 3 or 4 words. That was it, and then she just forwarded that email. And it was stuff like, "Oh, I made this really good friend. I don't want to say her name." And she put on there, "Oh, I have this new girlfriend." You know, I'm like, what? So I messaged Dana, like right in front of this little princess, because she was like the big gossip queen. And I emailed this Dana. I said, "Hey, can you send me back what I sent you? Like, because there's a girl here, a jealous girl, that's trying to make some trouble." And then it made it even better because she messaged some of my guy friends some homosexual stuff, and she was trying to share that, and that shot her credibility right there. But it was just so petty, and I was like, I don't even know how this damn thing works. No, I didn't say that. She's my friend, is what I said. Oh yeah, stupid teenage girls, right? But yeah. So I was in Churchill for like 6-7 months. I waitered, partied lots. You know, as a kid, all you do is drink there. I always say my alcohol tolerance was never higher than it was when I was 18 living in Churchill, because we drank every single day sometimes. If I was going to school, which by the way was ridiculous because I was going to school there, all but one class was classes I already had, because you have to pick your classes there. It's such a small classroom. You have to pick your classes the year before, what courses you're going to take. So there was only one course I needed to take. That I needed. Everything else I had, so it was like upgrading. Yeah, it was a waste of time for me to go to school. But school nights, it would be school, and then I go to work, and then I go for drinks at the bar. Because I was 18, it was a big deal. Like 18-year-olds in Manitoba can go to the bar. So I felt like an adult, and I would hang out with the adults, and yeah, my alcohol tolerance in Churchill was never higher than it's ever been in my rest of my life. Like, I couldn't drink. If I drank 3 Ryan Cokes right now, I'd have a good buzz on. I wouldn't be completely drunk, but I'd have a good buzz on. And my Churchill Randy could probably drink about 8 or 9 of them before a buzz would happen, or before I'm drunk. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I did when I was there. Like, we drank, and now we get into where I say, this was a dark time. It was because of my aunt, whom I lived in Churchill with. She was very abusive. More so mentally, because I was bigger than her. But she really, really, really picked on me. And her little shit son, he was 14 at the time, was like her best friend. It was really pathetic, because she's like my age now. Back then, she didn't have any friends. And she would come home and she would talk shit about people trying to apply for loans from the bank and everything else. She would complain to him about office politics and everything else. And I'm like, he's fucking 14, he doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, and she would always tell me, you can never tell people I talk about this stuff because I get fired, it's confidential stuff. And, she would tell me things like, if I was upset about my mother, she'd be like, your mother's dead, she's not going back, you gotta just get used to that. Really treating me like shit. She would talk down about me, you're never going to finish school, you're not going to do this, you're going nowhere in life, etc., etc. We'd have chores to do around the house, and sometimes your son just wouldn't want to do them, and she'd tell me you have to do them. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, because your little shit kid doesn't want to do, chores, I gotta do them for him. What the fuck? I'm paying rent here, bitch. And, that's where, like, the final straw was, because he was such a spoiled little shit. He wouldn't talk to us, or he wouldn't talk to me if his mother wouldn't talk to me. She'd be upset at me about something. He would stop talking to me, He would always rat me out there about any little thing. And, I found out eventually that my $200 a month in rent I was giving her from my check, or every paycheck, sorry, $400 a month, it was ridiculous, was actually going into his pocket. He was getting an allowance every 2 weeks of $200. So I was actually paying him the rent money. So I was like, what the fuck is this? Eventually we got into a fight, and I called her out on this, and she told me, that's it, you're going back. You're getting out of here. I'll buy you a train ticket back, and you can go back to Saskatchewan. So I went to my boss, the mayor of Churchill. I told him everything. All the abuse, everything was going on. He told me, no, you can move in with me. I need you for bear season because, we're going to be short, and we need all the people we can get. So I told her, I said, because she kept kind of like psychological warfare as the day was coming, at the end of the month. She kept asking me, so did you put your notice in yet? Or did you call so-and-so back home to see if you have a place to stay? I'm like, no, I'm not leaving. The mayor of Churchill, Mike, still make it live with him. He wants me here for bear season. So now she knows she's in shit, because she knows someone to talk about her and the way she talks about people in Churchill doing paying business. So she was like, no, I was just kidding. I was going to kick you out. And I was like, yeah, but he's going to only charge me $200 a month for rent. And she's like, well, the rent I'm charging you is only, like, for your benefit. I mean, if you want to pay $200, then just pay $200. It's no big deal to me. So I started paying $200 a month rent after that because of that. But if I hadn't done or said anything, that shit wouldn't have happened. So that fall, she actually got offered the job of bank manager in Thompson for more money. Which was, it's a city, Thompson, where I live now. It's like a big, big town. So you're not as isolated like you are in Churchill. You're not paying $10 for a loaf of bread, is what I'm saying. Or $5 for a Mars bar, like you would in Churchill. So we were moving to Thompson. And, myself and Joy went back to Meadow Lake to visit his mom that summer. And she convinced him not to come back. She wanted him there to collect more welfare. She was still, addicted to substances, drugs, alcohol, and such. So she wanted him there for that. So now I had a choice to make. Do I go back and live with this crazy aunt without Joey there? Or do I stay in Meadow Lake, which my aunt Arlene was giving me an option. My aunt Arlene at the time was living with another substance abuser and his 2 daughters. And she also had her 4 kids as well. Well, 4 including Joey, now that he was there. And she was poor. There was no food in the house, nothing else. And I was like, I could, be reunited with all my friends, and everything else. Go back to, living in Meadow Lake and everything else. But it just, living conditions and everything else was just not ideal. I was like, I have to go back. So I went back and I moved to Thompson, and it's the decision I made that led me to where I'm sitting right here talking to you guys. I moved back with my aunt at the end of September to start school. Immediately I got a job at Safeway, and immediately you're paying $400 a month rent now. Back to $400 a month. She kicked up her abuse more because Joey wasn't there to tattle on her. To her siblings, because she was always worried he would tell her, the things she would do to her sister, and her sister would give her shit, so now it's just me. Everything. She tried to keep me down, kick me down. What a loser I was. I wouldn't graduate. I would end up getting a girl pregnant. Her son would graduate before I would and go off to university. I'm a loser. I'm this, I'm that. I'm gay because I don't have girlfriends. Her son went on a date with a nasty, nasty girl. Not just physically, but, like, inside. Like, from a personal level. Years later, a friend of mine would date her, and she's nasty. But regardless, she was very, very, very unattractive. And I remember she was laughing that he had a date, and I didn't have a date. I'm like, I would never bring a girl around this fucking place. Even the girl I was fooling around with in Churchill, I never brought her over because of that. And I have sexual preference, I told her. Your son clearly doesn't. She would do, like, psychological warfare. She would, like, paint my room before I got home, so I'd have to sleep in paint fumes or have the door open. She would constantly use me to move furniture on the weekends. My weekends, if I had a day off, was to help her rearrange her house. All sorts of crap like that. Yeah, it was terrible. She would kick my door, try to make me nervous if I was in there. Towards the end, she would act like I wasn't in the house. She would ask her son for things in the kitchen while I was there, to act like I didn't exist. Things like that. And then out of nowhere, she just decided towards the end of December, around the time of midterms in school, before Christmas break, that She wanted me out. She told me, I don't want you. You're gonna have to go live with your uncle and Brandon. My uncle, the substance abuser, the worst one of them all. And I'm gonna buy you a bus ticket to go see him. I said, okay, well, we're 2 weeks away from provincial exams. Let me do my provincial exams, which she knows because her son was in grade 9, I was in grade 12. And then I'll leave, and she agreed, okay, you can do your exams. The week of the exams, the Monday, because there was exams all week, she left a note on my bed when I got home, and it said, your bus ticket's for tomorrow, I want you out. She was trying to make sure that I didn't get to do my exams, so I'd fail that grade. Yeah, crazy bitch. I went to my wrestling coaches, who I just won regionals, and they were like, no, we'd like you to stay, and I can't believe this is happening. You could stay with us, maybe, but till your exams are over at least, and then we'd like you to stay, but if you have to go. And then one coach said, no, my fiance is in Japan, I have a spare room in my apartment, I'll charge you $200 a month for rent, you can go to school, finish your school, and everything else. So I took him up on that deal. And I always remember my aunt thought I had the day. The bus left at 1 in the afternoon the next day, and she said on her note she left me, she was going to drive me to the bus station. So she was actually going through an HR case at work. Surprise, surprise. Her employees all banded together because she was bullying them. So she was really stressed out about this. So she wasn't at work, she was at home all day, and she was pyro cleaning everything. And I was in my room with the TV on. I had a little black and white box TV she gave me. You know, that was the only TV I was allowed to have in a house. She was such a bitch. And I was watching the CBC News around noon, waiting for this guy, Jeff, to come pick me up, one of the coaches. And we were thinking it'd be so awkward when she answers the door. And he's here for me, and I get my bag and everything, and I leave, and she's like, what the fuck? You know, I'm driving you to the bus station, I have the bus tickets were on my bed. And she actually was in a bathroom vacuuming the carpet, she's so fucking crazy. And Jeff rang the doorbell, and she couldn't hear because she was vacuuming the carpet. So I remember I actually closed my door, and I locked it, my bedroom door, with the TV still going, and I got my bag, grabbed my shoes, and we left. It was like 4 days later. And her son, who hadn't talked to me in like a month because she told him not to talk to me, approached me at Walmart when I was doing undercover security work. I was doing that for a job. And he asked me, you know, where the key was, the spare key his mom wants to know. I said, I fucking threw it away. And then he asked me, well, where'd you go? My mom wants to know, like, she thought you were in that room, she kicked that door down. She thought you were in that room. And I was like, your mom's a fucking nut job, that's why I told her not to mind her own business, don't worry about me. And he left. I'd never seen him again, never spoke to him again since. I've never spoken to her again since. They left shortly after, like most companies do, to fix the HR case. It was her second HR case at this branch. They just moved her, and that's what happened. I'd never seen her again. I know from living with her that she was doing the same thing to her oldest daughter, because her oldest daughter, my cousin Chantal, had moved out with her when she was a teenager, because it's a weird situation where it's a mother favoring one kid more than the other, like blatantly, and she loves that fucking boy. I don't know what it is, it's fucking sick, the things they would talk about and everything is, I won't get into it here, but it's not things you talk about your son with, you know, it's things you talk about like your boyfriend with or something. It was fucked up. So I was glad I was out of there. I moved in with that Jeff guy and I started wrestling. I kept wrestling, and he also was a mixed martial artist, or he knew a bunch of martial arts, and we blended into mixed martial arts, and we started to do that after wrestling practice, and we ended up running a mixed martial arts school shortly after, which comes into play. So I ended up staying with him. I graduated. I moved into a trailer with a bunch of friends. We partied for the year after we graduated. I was doing mixed martial arts full-time as well. 5 days a week I was teaching it and training it. I had a great year that year. I was off on my own, finally living in our trailer. It was like a Jersey Shore, like fucking crazy shit went down there. You know, I had lots and lots of girlfriends, you know, and yeah, it was really good. Now, when I was wrestling, there was a girl on a team, Olivia, beautiful blonde girl, super nice friend of mine. Her dad, I used to sit with. He was a very nice older guy. I used to sit with him during when I wasn't wrestling, and we would talk. I knew him, Peter. I would always go and sit with him and talk with him because he's very friendly, very fatherly-like. I didn't know that he was one of the superintendents of the mine here in town. The mine here in town's been around since the 50s, and it's very, very, for years, close-knit. Like, it's who you know to get in kind of deal. And I didn't know this guy was superintendent. I didn't care, frankly. I didn't want to work at that mine. I wanted to just save up some money and get out of town and go live somewhere else. And yeah, when I graduated, he called me and said, "Do you want to work in a refinery in town here?" I was like, "No, I think I'm just going to try to leave. Work for a year and then leave." He said, "Okay." I actually got fired from that security job stupidly, but thank God I did. Dead-end security job, making $10 an hour. I let an employee sign off my time slip because it was such a poorly run company. They used to make us wait for bosses, like 45 minutes after our shift would end to sign our shit. They would have our shift would end right when their afternoon meeting would start, and we'd be stuck there on our own time. And I remember I was going down to a Randy Couture seminar, and I needed to leave now. And this other employee's like, "Well, I'll just sign it for you." I always sign this guy's, this manager's signature, because I don't want to wait around too. I was like, "All right, fine, I need to go." So he signed it. I came back. It's like, "No, you're fired. That's plagiarism." I called that Peter immediately, and he says, "Yeah, put all your paperwork in." I did. I did a physical the next week, and I was hired. I was starting the next week after that. And when I got hired on, there was people that were waiting years that started the day I started, and they kept asking, "How long did it take you?" to everybody else. And they got to me, I was like, "Like 2 weeks." Again, because it's who you know. So yeah, that happened in 2007. I graduated in 2006, and I've been working there ever since. I continued to do mixed martial arts until 2015. In 2012, I started to do professional speedball. And the other milestone I skipped over, I can't believe, was in 2009. I met my fiance in my class, my MMA class I taught. It was where I met a lot of girls, and I fooled around with a lot of girls from there. My main instructor actually used to tell me, he's like, "You gotta stop sleeping with the girls. We lose them, they never come back." I was like, "I can't. I'm not doing anything. This is all them." But I actually met her there, and I've been with her ever since. It was actually a little friend of mine that introduced us. And we bought a house in 2011. We bought a cabin in 2014. And we actually just recently bought a house this spring as well. We're actually going to move there and sell this one I'm in now. But yeah, I did that paintball from 2012 to 2015. Because then we started traveling twice a year. So yeah, my story, guys, really is like rags to riches kind of deal. I was very poor, as you guys found out from this story. I went through a really shitty time living with an abusive relative. So in the end, my crazy aunt's son ended up dropping out of school and getting a girl pregnant. The funny thing about my aunt was her biological father was Caucasian, and she was Native American, and she really tried to get into her kids' heads that they were only like 5% Native American, even though her mother, my grandmother, was a full-blooded Native American woman. So she was always like passively racist as well, and it was only fitting that her son impregnated a Native American girl, and now her grandkid is Native American. But yeah, it just shows karma does happen. Karma does get you. And yeah, that's how that ended for, her and that son. As well, my biological mother passed away in 2019. in the way I always thought she would. I prepared myself mentally. She died of an overdose. She was a massive substance abuser. You know, she sold herself for her drugs, for her fixes. It didn't affect me as much, or sorry, rather it affected me more than I thought it would. I don't know why, but it did. I would see her, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times a year growing up. She would stop by the house, and the moments I remember as a kid were actually pretty traumatizing, because she was always high, or she was high most of the time, and she'd have outbursts, and she was prone to seizures, and these were traumatizing things I witnessed as a little boy when she'd come and visit her mother, my grandmother. And yeah, but I always knew her. Like, she was always around, at least, like I said, 4 or 5 times when she wasn't on a bender, or, you know, just missing in action for months on end. So I think that's why it affected me so much, and it's a tragedy. It's a downright tragedy. She was such a beautiful woman, and she just got this rotten hand dealt in life, you know, because she really was young. I mean, I remember when I was 17 years old, looking through our old photo albums, I came across a picture of her. My grandmother had made her a cake for her birthday, and she came over to the house to visit, or the apartment to visit. And I remember I'm sitting on her lap, and I'm like 2 or 3 years old, and she's got a cake, and it has 17 on it. And I was like, oh my god, she was 17 years old. It's nuts, but, you know, it's sad as well. That kind of thing's so common, you know, among Native Americans, families that have been, you know, affected by, you know, these shitty circumstances. Just taking advantage of an older man in a situation she never should have been in, but, yeah, that's a shame. I do have siblings from her, quite a bit actually, 4 or 5 I believe, including a set of twins. I'm really close to my, not my second oldest, or my oldest sibling, but my second oldest, Raven. She changed her name to Victoria recently. Yeah, she's a sweetheart, and she means the world to me, and I'm so glad, you know, I got that out of this whole deal. But yeah, that's what happened with, you know, my biological mother. I never did talk to her again. The last time I spoke to her was the day of my mother's funeral. She never did show up to the funeral. She went and got high somewhere, but that was the last time I ever spoke to her. I never did, ever did see her again, so, yeah, but that's what happened with that. And it was all just leading to this, you know, this life I have now. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful fiance I should have married by now if not for COVID. Really good job, really good friends. I don't know if there's anything else I can touch up on in Thompson here for you guys. In terms of my life story, I've literally just been working and traveling, and yeah, it's been great. I started to do a Twitch stream in 2016, which I still do this day. I literally just got off an hour ago, or 2 hours ago, and I decided to start doing ASMR, you know. I don't know if anyone actually listened to this or watched this. It's over an hour and a half, I think. But man, if you listen to it and you enjoyed this, you know, let me know down below. Tell me maybe some of your similar life stories. I'd love to hear it. I've actually searched for ASMR stories before, life stories, and yeah, I know you guys always ask me questions and everything, and, you know, about my personal life, and this is pretty much, you know, all of it. Obviously, I left some really intimate portions out, but for the most part, what led me to where I'm at today, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I can touch on here, guys. If you guys have any other questions, I'm like an open book. I'll always answer them for you guys. If you know some of these places I just discussed, let me know as well. I'm curious. But yeah, guys, if you guys enjoyed it, let me know down below. I really hope you guys enjoyed this story, and peace out.